Hey guys, CalebBakes01 here. Welcome back for another random album review. For today's album that I am reviewing, it is the sophomore album of the English indie rock, alternative emo, punk pop band Moose Blood and their 2016 album Blush. That was sort of a mouthful intro, and trust me, that wasn't my first take. I just wanted to sort of include the sounds that you're going to get with this album. If I really had to break it down and pick a subgenre, I'd say indie rock, alternative emo. Maybe they're the best ways to describe this sound of the album. As I said, this album came out in 2016, so that is now 8 years old, so it's got a few years under its belt. And obviously, random album review, I pull them out randomly. And when I got this one, I said, okay, I haven't listened to this one in a while. It's only 10 tracks, so I know each listen will go by pretty quickly. I was excited to go into it. And let's get straight into my thoughts now. So cutting straight to the chase, as I said, hadn't revisited this album in a while. And with this re-listen for my review, I can see why. When this album first came out, or should I say when the first single for this album first dropped, being the song Honey, I really loved that song. And I was like, okay, this is a band that I'm going to keep watching, because I hadn't heard their first album. As I said, this is their sophomore. And then their second single came out, Knuckles. Once again, a home run. And I was like, okay, this band is really putting out songs that I'm enjoying. This is an album I'm excited for. And even though I didn't pick this album up in 2016, I picked it up maybe a couple years later, maybe even 3 or 4 years later, actually. But between that time, still listening to the album, or more so the singles. But as I said, revisiting this album, I can see why I hadn't listened to it in a while, because to me, this album, first of all, it's in a subgenre that I'm not the biggest fan of, with this slow indie rock sound. But also, a lot of the songs on this album are very safe, and they sort of blend together. A lot of the time I was listening to this album, getting confused with what song I was listening to, because all the songs just sort of mesh together, sound the same, and there's not a lot of personality and character in, I'd say, majority of the songs here. Maybe 6 or 7 out of the 10 that we have here. Not a lot of them, really have that staying power, and they don't turn these switches in my brain where I can go, okay, that's that song, because they don't have this individual personality. Besides a few, there are a few tracks that I can safely return back to and enjoy it every time, but unfortunately this album as a whole, as a majority, it's not the strongest. So every album that I review, or every album at least that I have in my collection, I enjoy. None of them are terrible albums. I'm not like that. With my movies, I will pretty much buy anything that's horror, but with music, I'm a lot more selective. As I said, when this album first came out, first was released in 2016, looking back, I was probably just more hooked on the singles and the songs that I knew very well, but I didn't know the back catalogue for this album very well, which is unfortunate, because as I said, it's only 10 songs. I should have known the back catalogue a lot more. But I had listened to the full album a lot before buying it, and I don't know, maybe it's also a mixture of, over time, this album sort of wore off for me. It's a very moody album, as in I need to be in a certain mood, I need to be in a certain vibe to really enjoy it and let it sink in, but majority of the time, as I said, this album doesn't have a lot of replay value for me. But let's get into the track list. So the album opens with a very good song to open with, being Pastel. The song and, the album in total just starts off with these banging drums, and the song is actually really catchy. It's not a high point for the album. If I'm getting to the high point, we're going to go straight to tracks 2 and 3, being Honey and Knuckles, as I said, the 2 leading singles. That was my first ever taste of the band Moose Blood, and I'm like, okay, we have a seriously good band on our hands here. And that's what really got me involved with this album, and maybe what sort of blinded me to maybe the back catalogue of this album, because those 2 songs there, being Honey and Knuckles, as I said, are really, really good songs, and ones I can listen to and safely always enjoy. So there we go, the first 3 songs off to a good start, but then from tracks 4 to 10, it slowly goes down. We have Sulk, which isn't a bad song, but as I said, this is where we're starting to fall into safe and maybe repetitive and songs meshing together. But Sulk isn't completely bad. It just sort of goes down from here though. We get Glow, once again not too bad. Cheek, which unfortunately isn't the best. Sorry, this is gonna sound weird, but they're all just one-word titles, so that's why I'm just saying random things right now. But Cheek. A song that surprised me, it's still not my favourite, but a song that surprised me on replay. It's one that I didn't really remember too much at all, Sway. That was a song that surprised me with how much I enjoyed it, but still, as I said, not at the pinnacle. And then from there, again, you just have another 3 songs to wrap up the album that all sort of mesh together, being Shimmer, Spring, and Freckle. Freckle is a song that I remembered actually really liking. It's one of the fastest songs on the album. But with that being said, it's also the closing song, and as I said, closing songs need to be really memorable, but for me, Freckle doesn't stay there. And already like that, we've gone straight through the 10 listed songs here on the album, and as I said, I went through them very quickly, and there wasn't a lot of high points besides the start of the album, which is really unfortunate. So going in to film this review, I knew this album was going to be very quick to go through, because as I said, there's not a lot of high points, unfortunately. This album isn't a complete dud, as I said. I only buy albums that I like, or maybe at the time really like. Some of them, like this one, don't have a lot of staying power. It still is my favourite Moose Blood album, which is saying something because I have 2 of their albums in my collection. Maybe one day we'll see a review of the other one. But this was my first taste of Moose Blood, as I said. So this album came out, once again, I'm going to say it, in 2016. So I would have been 15. I really enjoyed it back then, but maybe it's just, as I said, a mixture of not being my favourite subgenre of music, maybe just over time, and yeah, the fact that a lot of the songs here are safe and meshed together, and if you notice and you actually know the songs pretty well, a lot of the tracks that I sort of highlight here are the faster, more upbeat, punk pop sounding songs. Pastel, Honey, Knuckles. Even though I wasn't the biggest fan of Freckle, the surprise Dark Horse that I said, Sway, that one's a bit more fast paced and punk pop sounding. But then, just a lot of the other songs are a little bit too slow for me and sort of mesh together. So from here, we'll get into my rating. So Moose Blood's Blush, this is a perfect example of a little bit of my time captured in an album here. As I said, I would have been 15. I remember looking back, I thought I really liked this album, and I probably did back then, but over times, tastes in music change, and as I said, this album isn't bad. I just sort of need to be in a mood for it. There are times where I do put this album on, but most of the time, as I said, I revisit the same tracks, and I need to be in a certain mood to listen to the full playlist. But if I'm going to rate this album out of 10, I am going to give it a really soft 5 out of 10. It sort of hurts because, as I said, I thought I really liked this album, and it is my favourite Moose Blood album, so I'm like 5, maybe that's a little bit too low, but I'm looking at the 5 and up, and it doesn't deserve anything higher than a 5. Most generous rating I could give it is a 5.5, but I think 5 out of 10 is fine for now. It's not an album I regret buying, because as I said, there are good songs on here, especially the first half of this album mostly, but as I said, just a lot of the songs mesh together, and unfortunately not a lot of staying power with Blush. So I think with that album done, this is now the lowest rated album that I've done so far. I've only done 3 albums, but 5 out of 10 for Moose Blood's Blush. As I said going into this one, I sort of knew it was going to be quick because a lot of the songs just, as I said, don't have a lot of personality and staying power and character that songs need to have, especially with a track list of 10. There's only 10 songs. You can really give these songs their own sound and own feel, but a lot of them mesh together, and that's unfortunate. But I'll really get into the songs individually coming up in my track list ranking. That should be up at the same time, so check that out. And I just want to thank you guys again for joining me as always, and I'll see you guys in a video soon. Thanks.